Hello, this is Eric. Today is January the 10th, 2023. And in this class, we'll be talking about the Dutch invasions into the Portuguese colony. Previously, we had addressed the issue of the French invasions into the Portuguese colony. Now it is time for us to address the Dutch invasions, okay? Here you have a map made by the Dutch concerning the Brazilian territory so that they could attack the Pernambuco captaincy, right? If you don't know what a captaincy is, please go back to our previous classes. We talked a lot about them, and then you go back to this class, okay? Well, the Dutch invasions into Brazil took place along the 17th century, precisely from 1630 to 1654. And the Dutch aimed to set up a colony based on sugar production, okay? This is a technique that they had developed really well. And they are going to work in partnership with the Portuguese. We're going to understand with more details how that happened. Okay, so the invasion, we're also going to talk about the governor, Maurice de Nassau, ahead. Okay, the invasion, the important thing now is that you understand that the invasion occurred due to economic and diplomatic reasons. And those diplomatic reasons involve the Iberian Union. We must understand what that is so that we understand the Dutch invasions, right? Because concerning the French, they were unhappy with the Treaty of Tordesilhas, and they simply wanted to invade Brazil, to try to establish their colonies and profit from them. But as we're going to see, the Dutch, they had a very profitable agreement with the Portuguese. And the whole problem began after the Iberian Union. And we must understand what it is, okay? This is King Philip II, okay? And we must understand who this guy is and what is the context involving him. So, as I said, we can understand the Dutch invasions into Brazil. Okay, so the Iberian Union took place between 1580 and 1640. And it was the unification of the Spanish and Portuguese crowns from the succession crisis of the Portuguese. So what happened? The thing is that the King of Portugal, Dom Sebastian, disappeared at the Battle of Alcácer Quibir against the Moors in Morocco in 1578. As the king had left no heirs to succeed him, his great-uncle Henry had taken over. However, Don Enrique died 2 years later, and as he also had no direct heirs, a crisis of succession to the throne of the Portuguese took place. So after the death of Don Enrique, we have three suitors that claim kinship with Don Sebastian, or Don Sebastian, as you prefer. And they launched themselves in the struggle for the throne. Among the suitors was the Spanish King Philip II, who had great support among the members of the Portuguese nobility. After invading Portugal and winning small conflicts against one of the intenders to the throne, named Anthony, King Philip II was crowned King of Portugal. Okay, so during his reign, Philip, this guy you're seeing there at your screen, he held the Portuguese in positions related to the administration of Portugal and the Portuguese colonies, especially in Brazil. This action of the king was taken to avoid any kind of wear and tear with the Portuguese and minimize the risk that rebellions would take place in Portugal. So his motto was no fight, guys. Everything is okay. I am going to please you. Don't worry. So therefore, it is perceived that Spain did not take control over the Brazilian colony. they left it to the Portuguese. Historian Thomas, for example, Thomas Skidmore states that the great change determined by Spain and Brazil was the regularization of administrative and judicial procedures, including the development of new civil and criminal codes in 1603. In addition, the Spanish decreed the division of Brazil into two parts. This is very important. One called the State of Maranhão, which grouped Maranhão, Ceará, and Pará, and whose capital was the city of São Luís. We know about the city from our previous class because the city was founded by the French. And the other called the State of Brazil, which remained with the city of Salvador as the capital. This division was established by the Spaniards as of 1621. Now, we must understand that Spain, just ignore here okay? Spain was at war with the Netherlands at this time. And as revenge, the Netherlands attacked Portugal's former possessions, right? So the invasion of the Northeast by the Dutch was not purely an act motivated by economic interests. It was not like the invasions performed by the French. There is this context that involved the diplomatic relations between these three countries, Portugal, Spain, and the Netherlands. We must remember that the sugar activity was the main economic activity in Brazil and was highly profitable. So the installation of the mills, they took place by means of Dutch loans. It was the Dutch that lent money to the Portuguese because it was very costly, very expensive to install and keep and refine the sugar that was produced inside these sugar mills, right? So the Dutch, they sponsored, they financed all the sugar mill structure. Okay, so and I mean they financed the installation of the sugar mill and the refinement and distribution of this product throughout Europe. So it was a very profitable economic partnership between Portugal and the Netherlands. It was profitable for both sides, but the relationship began to be shaken from the enthronement of that guy I showed you now, Philip II of Spain, right? The thing is that the two empires were unified, as I have already said, and the Dutch, as a consequence, since they were at war with the Netherlands, the Dutch would be excluded from the sugar business. So as a revenge, the Netherlands attacked Portugal's former possessions. I hope I have been able to clarify the reasons behind this attack by the Netherlands. So the Salvador, first they began to attack Africa, the African colonies. And then they headed towards Salvador, right? They attacked Salvador in 1604. And then after a few conflicts, a truce was signed in 1609. Now, in 1621, the Dutch founded the company called West India Company, right? This company, actually, it's very important that you understand this. It was established in the Netherlands, and it aimed, to found a Dutch colony in America to control sugar-producing centers. And through it, the Dutch also turned against slave-selling positions or posts in Africa. Oh, so the Netherlands were good. They were the good guys. No. It was because they saw in the slaves a great potential of people that would be consuming this product. It was not because they were good. They were, compassionate about these slaves. Right? So, the first major attack, after this truce, a few years went by, and then we have the first major attack, the first major attack. Let me try to underline it. The first major attack against. Oh gosh, now I don't know how to. Okay. The first major attack against Salvador took place in 1624, right? Well, after this attack, the target was Salvador again, with the Dutch trying to conquer the city in order to expand throughout Brazil. After a day of fighting, they conquered the city, but they could not expand into the countryside of Bahia. The capital, Salvador, the whole region of Bahia. Why? The resistance on the outskirts of the city was so great that the Dutch ended up being expelled, from Salvador in a year later, right? So, but do you think that they gave up? No way. They were really, really committed with the purpose of establishing their profitable colony, their profitable sugar colony in Brazil. So what did they do? They turned it to Pernambuco, right? They attacked Olinda and Recife, two towns in the Pernambuco captaincy, and that happened in 1630. So this one was successful, right? Because they went to Pernambuco with an armed force of more than 7,000 men. The region had more than 100 mills, so that's why they really got prepared for that attack, because they knew that there were plenty of mills there and that it would be really, really a good breakthrough, considering their expectations and their goals, right? So the colonial administration was handed over to John Maurice of Nassau, that guy we had mentioned, and that took place in 1637. This is the photo of the guy. So between 1637 and 1643, the Dutch colony was administered by German Maurice of Nassau, right? This is the guy there. And then the expansion took place, and it reached regions such as Paraíba and Sergipe, for example. From 1637, the colonial administration was handed over to John Maurice of Nassau, the one I showed you there. He was a military, so he carried out a series of reforms in Pernambuco and considerably prioritized the main urban centers, that is Recife and Olinda. Now, we must understand what happened between these two cities, because these two urban centers, because it is essential that we understand why the conflicts that are going to take place there between these two urban centers actually started, right? So we had and the Dutch maintain the institution of slave labor. This is very important to say. Nassau sought to develop the sugar economy, that had been destroyed by the battle, right? He improved hygiene standards in Recife. He increased food distribution. He encouraged scientific and artistic development in Pernambuco. So the guy did a lot of stuff there. And he ensured religious freedom in the territories it controlled. Why? Because there was a great number of Protestants among the Dutch, right? And here in Brazil, we had the Catholic Church. So they ensured that there was not going to be any religious conflicts among them like it happened to the French, right? So the problem is that the financial problems of the West India Company, they gave room to the questioning of an existence of the Dutch colonial project in Brazil. So the intention was to develop a trade-based colony, and it failed. And it was at that moment that Nassau had to return to the Netherlands. So you can probably understand that the Portuguese were really, they really kept an eye on all of that, they realized that the Dutch were not economically well. Their leader was sent back to Holland, to the Netherlands, right? And to cap it all, we had the restoration of Portugal. Yes, no more Iberian Union. So from 1645, we had the problems. Why? Because since 1640, the country of Portugal had been restored. I mean, no more Iberian Union, as I said. And that was an event that marked the end of the Iberian Union and put the Bragança family in power again. So after that, remember, that took place in 1640, right? So the Portuguese said, all right, now let's talk seriously here. We want this piece of the territory back. So from 1645, we had the Brazil Wars, the conflicts between the Portuguese and the Dutch for the control of the Northeast, right? And as the situation of the Dutch in the Northeast worsened, support for the Portuguese was increased. So the more Portugal advanced in the battle, the more support the Portuguese received. So the Brazil Wars lasted until 1654, and the Dutch were being gradually defeated. So it was not a one-day war. This battle lasted until 1654. 1654, as you see here. So in 1654, the Dutch were expelled from the Brazilian territory, right? It is very important to mention here the two battles of Guararapes, right? These battles, they took place and they were strategically saying, they were very important for the Dutch defeat. So as I said, the Dutch were expelled in 1654. And, well, what else can I say? Let me see what we have here. So after the war was over, right, we had a situation that was very peculiar. The Olinda farmers, they were indebted after the Dutch attacks. Why? Because the war against the Dutch destroyed the mills and they could not produce sugar, right? And to worsen the situation, the Dutch invested, after they were expelled from the Brazilian territory, they started to invest in the Antilles, right? I'm sorry about the pronunciation. I'm not sure about how to pronounce this word, but you certainly know what place I'm talking about in case I'm mispronouncing it, okay? So, the Olinda farmers, they were really in hot water. And we had, on the other hand, Recife, right? So, there was a conflict involving the farmers of Olinda and the merchants of Recife. And why did that happen, right? Remember that both regions are inside a captaincy of Pernambuco, right? So after the invaders were expelled, Olinda started to increase the taxes, in order to offset the losses of the war. Because as I said, the mills were totally destroyed. And that increase, those increased taxes, they reached also the merchants of Recife. So they encompassed Recife. And Recife was not chaotic as Olinda. In Recife, you didn't have farmers producing sugar cane. you had merchants, and these merchants were Portuguese. So the Recife citizens, what did they do? They didn't want to pay, more taxes to resolve a problem that was not theirs, right? So the Recife citizens, they managed to elevate the status of the center to the status of a village, right? And by establishing, this status, they didn't need to pay, this extra taxes to Olinda. So Olinda said, "What? Are you gonna do that? Really? No way." So we had a battle, a war between Olinda and Recife, right? And that war was called the Peddlers' War. Peddlers. This is the name that was given to the Portuguese merchants in a very pejorative manner, by the way, right? So the Portuguese merchants in Recife were called by the Olinda farmers peddlers in a very pejorative manner. So this war took place in 1710, right? We have here a picture where you can see the slaves, right? And this guy here, that is a typical Portuguese merchant, right? As you can see, I wouldn't be happy if I were the slaves, would you? Certainly not. So, Recife's political and economic dominance took place in the captaincy of Pernambuco. So they elevated their status to one of a village, right? And they became politically and economically dominant in the captaincy. And they won the war against Olinda. That is very important to say, right? So what happened then? Let me see here. We have, it's saying here, Recife is elevated to the status of administrative headquarters of Pernambuco. That took place in 1711. So, what we had there is that basically, the captaincy of Pernambuco became a symbol of the fight against foreign invasion. The Pernambuco captaincy already showed this when they expelled the Dutch invaders. But after the war, you had an increasing anti-Lusitan feeling. Remember that the Recife merchants were, in most of them, Portuguese. So basically, what the Olinda farmers saw was Portuguese dominating them. And along the time, although they received the pardon of their debts, right? And that was done so that there were no other conflicts. So although the Olinda farmers were forgiven, their in-debts were forgiven, they didn't like the idea of having the Portuguese dominating them. They were nobility. They didn't like the merchants, the bourgeoisie dominating over them. So that would create an increasing anti-Lusitanian feeling. And that feeling would spread to the rest of the country, to the other regions of the country, and would little by little conduct the country to the actual desire of being totally free from Portugal. But that would take time to take place, and that was a process that we will be analyzing in the next classes. Thank you so much for watching this class, and see you.